Welcome, everyone, and good morning. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes as I continue to let people in. All right, we're going to get started. Good morning, everyone. Hi, howdy. Welcome to Past Publication this morning. I'm so excited to have you all here learning with us. Today, we have a research group from Johns Hopkins presenting on the essential components of grant writing. This group consists of Dr. Stephen Ross, Dr. Jennifer Morrison, and Dr. Amanda Neitzel. We're so excited to have them here with us and to share the knowledge that they bring to the table in regards to this topic. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started this morning. I'm going to hand over the control to Dr. Morrison, and they're going to begin their presentation. Excited to have you all here with us today.
I think Steve Ross is going to start out with introduction.
Yes, I hope everybody can hear me. It's very nice to be here, and we appreciate you as an audience. I believe this is the 19th year consecutively that we have worked with Texas A&M on various grant projects. It's been a long partnership, and we really appreciate it. And that partnership has been driven fundamentally by winning grants and having good writing. So that's what we're going to address today. Very briefly about our center at Johns Hopkins. It's called the Center for Research and Reform in Education. We specialize in our center in actually two focuses. One is on third-party evaluations of all shapes and sizes and different subjects, mostly in K through 12. And different kinds of studies and different kinds of grant writing that we do. Some is federal, some is to school districts and to foundations, and some is actually to educational publishers and providers who need third-party evaluation. A second focus of our center is in evidence dissemination through the Evidence for ESSA website, which in the wake of defunding of the What Works Clearinghouse, it's in operation, but it's not doing reviews anymore, has really had a much raised profile and much more responsibility for us in terms of disseminating to the country, to practitioners, researchers, policymakers, what works in education. So I hope those of you who are listening that are less familiar with Evidence for ESSA, check out evidenceforessa.org because it is a clearinghouse to tell us what programs have obtained rigorous evidence. Today, you'll be hearing from our two deputy directors of our center, Jennifer Morrison and Amanda Neitzel, on writing grants and on good writing and on what happens with reviews. So with that, I'll turn it over. I think Amanda will be going first and take it away.
Hello there, everyone. Um, I'm Amanda Neitzel. I've been working with this team at CRE for a while now, and I'm really excited to talk about proposals. I feel like I'm writing them constantly, which I think is probably what you all will be doing someday. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit from the writing perspective of the people who have to actually craft the proposal. So you can go to the next slide. And really the whole goal of this, in very, very small font, is you want to write a proposal that makes the reviewers quickly understand what the problem is and that you have the best solution for it and that you have a team that can actually deliver this, which might be a little different than thinking about I want to write the best description of my project. But no, the point is you want them to be as excited about this as you are. You can go to the next step, the next part. A lot of times we think about it mostly as it's just writing this narrative, but there's actually a lot of other steps you need to take to get a really strong proposal. We're gonna walk through sort of what I think about at each of those stages and what I think is important to keep in mind that you may not already know about. You can go to the next one. So the very first thing that I worry about is understanding your audience. Sometimes we don't think about this when we're writing proposals. We just think, oh, I know how to write about a power analysis. I know how to describe my research design. Like I understand the significance. I can write this, but you really need to think about who are you submitting this to? Because there's a lot of different people providing funding and contracts and grants in this space, and they're all different. They all have different goals, different agendas, different expectations. And the reviewers that they use are different as well. And Jennifer's going to talk a little bit more about that when she talks about the reviewer perspective. But you really need to pitch what you're writing and tailor it to these types of audiences. Also, there's going to be different levels of technical detail required or available. So I've got an example here of, on the left, a very long paragraph writing about a power analysis, which I included in an EIR that's public. Yeah, might actually be the specific one from the public proposal that you can see. I would write a similar paragraph if I was writing a proposal or LOI to Arnold Ventures. I know that the folks reviewing these have a lot of technical background to assess this. And I also know that they very much care about power. They want to make sure that the studies that they're funding are adequately powered. If there's anything there at all, you're going to find it. So that's what I would write. On the right-hand side, I looked at a few of our winning state and district proposals that we wrote within the last year. I mentioned power nowhere. It does not come up at all. Just thinking about those those specific reviewers, those specific audiences, they're not interested in power. If I talked about power, I would have to spend half a page explaining what power is and why they should even care about power and then give the results. So I didn't even talk about power. So you can go to the next slide, Jennifer, because I have another example. Oh, there it is. So this is another one that I have where, again, part of this is not just explaining why this project is important and what you're going to do. You also have to sell that your team can get it done. You can get it done successfully. You have all the expertise that you need because they want to fund things that are going to happen and be successful. And so again, I've got two descriptions of our team at CRE. And so this is from my proposal for Arnold Ventures and really matches a lot of the things that I would put in something to a federal grant, which really focuses on our center. We've received grants before. We can manage large, complicated grants. We have experience with things like with these types of grants, and we will be able to handle all the administrative, financial, logistical issues. And then you look at the district side, and we wrote about we have experience working with school districts and dealing with all of the different players and building those relationships, which is a very different thing to emphasize. That proposal had no mention of our ability to handle the fiscal and research integrity responsibilities. It was about we're going to be good people to work with. And you can see on the feds, it's more about there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of numbers, and it's very complicated. We've done this before. We have the infrastructure to handle it. So just thinking about your audience, you're going to write very different things for each one because all of these examples I'm pulling were all coming from proposals to evaluate tutoring. So some of these are actually the same project, just written to different audiences. You can go to the next one. So how do you get to know these funders? Spend a lot of time on their website. You need to understand their mission, their priorities. Sometimes in the RFP, they have sort of a little paragraph about what they're hoping to do, but go to their website and see historically, how does this fit in the other work that they're doing? What other sorts of trends are happening? find examples of what's been funded in the past. So a lot of foundations, they have examples of what's been funded in the past. IES makes the lists of what's been funded in the past. So you can start to see, well, what kinds of things are they funding? How similar or different is what I have? How does that fit? Because you want to be able to show them not only that this is an important and good project, but it actually fits with their whole goal. This is pushing their agenda ahead as well. Um, so, for example, if you look at Arnold Ventures, they're very interested in rigorous work that tells us what works and that policymakers can use to make decisions. That's a very specific type of research that they want. They're funding rigorous quantitative evaluations of programs and policies and procedures that states and districts can enact tomorrow. They're trying to change what's happening at the policy level. So they need projects that are going to help them do that. And then again, look at what they're doing publicly. Are some of those program officers or folks presenting at conferences? Are they writing blogs? What kinds of other information or social media are they putting out? Because that's also going to help you guide what do they prioritize? What do they actually care about? The final one is office hours, or if you can get any sort of time with program officers. These are key and so helpful. Not everyone offers this, but if there are presentations or webinars or transcripts of those things, to get those conversations, because sometimes you can get information that isn't written down in the RFP, but then comes up of, oh, this is what they're actually looking for here. Great, now I know, because it's not really clear. So there's a lot of unspoken information. On some of the things I've applied to, the program officers actually have a role in selection and championing specific projects. Like in Arnold Ventures, there's reviewers, but once you get to a certain point, the program officer needs to take those highest projects and try to sell them to their board. So that's not really using the regular review process. That's, you need to now convince somebody. So you need to make sure that that program officer is excited about this project, because they're going to have to talk about it on your behalf. NSF also has a very different review process that again, you have reviewers. I've served on those review boards, and you have the criteria and the rubrics, and you fill those all out. Once you get to the highest projects, then you sit down with the program officer and have conversations, and you actually get to sort of fight for what you're doing. And I've gotten information from program officers after that, when I've submitted and been unsuccessful, to get feedback. And again, they were able to tell me, these were the concerns. Do you know how you would ever address these? And then I could say, I'm thinking about this. And he would say, that is exactly what they're looking for. And that's helpful. You won't get that everywhere though, but you should actually see, can I have a conversation with these people? How much information can I really get out of them? You go to the next slide, which is, we're moving into, that's just the initial prep work to think in your head, what am I supposed to be doing here? We move on then to actually getting started, but you're not writing anything yet. You're not writing your narrative yet, but you're going to start making some stuff. First, you need to make a plan. Make an actual list of every single thing that needs to go in with that proposal, and make a plan of when you're going to have it by, who's going to be in charge of it, and how you're going to get it. Sometimes you think writing proposals is just the narrative, and then you sit down and read the RFP and get into it, and you see that the narrative is just one of what feels like 100 different pieces that you need to submit with it. You won't be able to do all of them either. Some of them you have to go to somebody else at your university or a school district or somewhere else. So having a list of what you actually need and how you're going to get it done is important, because otherwise you're going to sit down on the day you're submitting, which will of course will be 3 hours before the deadline, and you're suddenly going to realize, oh wait, I needed this letter signed by our financial admin person that states something about the finances, and you now only have 3 hours to get it, and that's going to be challenging. Or you're going to sit down and suddenly realize, wow, I needed to write this human subject statement, which again isn't hard, but it adds stress. So look on the front end and see, oh, here's the long checklist of everything I needed to do. That is in addition to just writing a really great narrative. Make a timeline and assume it's going to take twice as long as you think it will. That is basically how I have to plan things now, because I think this should only take an hour. I could get this done in an hour. It never gets done in an hour. So you should plan for at least twice as long as you think it should, to be realistic. And then finally is make a team. Nobody is writing federal grants alone. Nobody is writing and crafting these very large projects. All of it individually. You have to think about who do you have access to who can support different parts where they have more expertise. So, I mean, I've worked with Jennifer, I've worked with Steve. We all work together. There's other folks on our center. Different people have different areas of strength. And so you can leverage that. Um, I have somebody who's amazing at this organizational planning, making sure everyone's on track. She can't do anything with budgets to save her life. So you have to have someone else to do that. So just make sure, make up a team who's actually going to help you get this proposal in. Um, and then starting to move towards writing a narrative, think about that outline. And I think Jennifer will talk about this or mention this as well. But the very first thing I do once I have my plan of what all do I need and who's going to help me is I make an outline for the narrative that exactly matches the RFP. So I sit with the RFP, I get all of the specific criteria, and those are my headings and subheadings. And then I put comments in that describe each of those straight from the RFP. And if you go to the next page, Jennifer, we can show you a sort of an example. So this is a screenshot from a currently active Arnold Ventures call that is about cell phone use in schools. The topic isn't really important, but you can see that they have words in bold. The top half is coming from one that's for policy relevance. The bottom one is about study design. And you can start to see they have something that says what we're looking for. And then all of those other bullets, those are my headings and subheadings. So my main headings are policy relevance and study design. And under those, under policy relevance, I'll have US relevance and scope and pathway to policy impact. Under research design, there's a whole bunch more things that are like sample, power, mitigation, causal inference, all kinds of different things. Those are my headings. Use the exact words they have, do it in the same order, because the reviewers will be reviewing against those criteria. They'll have some sort of rubric or something that they're using to score this. You need to make it absolutely simple for them to find all of the pieces. That's something I've heard from, I had that experience when I reviewed for NSF. I heard this from a program officer at Arnold Ventures, that you need to make it really easy for the reviewer to find what they need to score. Make it easy. So use the same words from the actual call. If they're talking about something in one way, use that language because it makes it easier to line it all up. And then you can go to the next page with another part of getting started is you've made sort of this template. Don't start writing yet. Now you're going to need to do two things. You should lay out a logic model or theory of action for whatever the thing is that you're going to do. You need to understand the theory or the process or specific, what are the components of this thing? Some proposals you'll include that, some you won't. It doesn't matter. You need to do this so that you are very clear about what is all included in this and that you need to talk about. Then that will help guide filling in those sections of your template. The other part is to make a research plan. And my favorite way to do this is to make the table that I've included there, where you start with, these are all the research questions we're asking. And now you need to start matching it up. What method will we use? What data are we collecting? What are the specific tools? When is it happening? How am I analyzing this? What are the potential risks or things that would make this not work? Because when you're writing, you need to address all of those things. And you need to make sure you don't miss something or add something in that you don't need. So if I have 3 research questions, these are all the instruments, these are the approaches, these are the methods, you will need to talk about all of those to some degree. The level of detail, ties back to who your audience is, but you'll need an answer for all of those. And you don't want to add other things. So if you're talking, one of your research questions is analyzing, not only literacy, but social emotional learning, but you never mention an instrument, that's a problem for a reviewer. And they're going to say, well, they didn't say what they were needed to do for this one. Or if you have this set of research questions and then under your measures and instruments, you talk about, this particular survey of teachers, and it doesn't line up to any of your research questions. Again, the reviewer will say, well, why is this here? What are they doing with this? So doing this on a table makes it very tight and know that every piece that's in there needs to be in there and there's nothing extra. And then on the next page, it picks up from here because a lot of the work is on the front end. You need to write your narrative. I usually start with the design first, and then I kind of go backwards. But again, if you're writing with a team, you can actually break up different sections and people can take different sections. Once you have that, you need to go back and make sure that this has a very strong opening. because you need to grab the reviewer's attention right away, because they probably don't really, I mean, some of them will care, but you need to get them as excited about this as you are. And they're not going to read, they don't want to get excited on page 15. You need to get them excited at the very beginning. So make sure to make it very clear early on what you're doing and why they should be excited about this. Um, what's tricky is a lot of these have page limits that feel like they aren't long enough, but you still need to make sure that you're defining terms and ideas when you're not sure if the reviewer will have that. For example, on the NSF review, I've received an NSF grant. So, I've done some stuff with science, but not a science content expert. A lot of the reviewers that I worked with on that one were not science content experts. So some of the proposals that came in sort of assumed this knowledge of science education that none of us had. So it was very hard to assess, well, how important is this? Is this actually a big deal? Does everyone think this way? So make sure that you're clearly stating some of those things. You don't need to go into dramatic detail, but enough that somebody who's a non-expert would understand, unless you know for a fact that all the reviewers are experts. You also need to, head on address any kind of objections that people might have to your study. We've been submitting proposals to evaluate after school tutoring. And one of the biggest hurdles is that what we know about tutoring says after school tutoring doesn't work. And there's a lot of studies that show after school tutoring doesn't work. And for a variety of different reasons, it all makes sense. But there's a lot of people who won't even, will explicitly say, we don't fund after school tutoring because it doesn't work. So you have to address that early and convince them, yeah, that research exists, but this is how this is different and why it still matters. So don't be afraid to lean into what people might not know. And then also this sort of gets into that, making sure to talk up your team. You need to address any kind of, possible failure points, like, oh, this relies on recruiting 100 schools. What happens if you don't get 100 schools? What are you doing to make sure you're getting 100 schools? What's your backup plan? You need to talk about those things, because they only want to give money to projects that are actually going to happen. So if you have something that sounds like it might be difficult, but you don't explain why is this actually feasible, they're going to wonder, I don't know that this person can actually carry this on. And that's tied to identifying your team too. You need to make sure you have people with expertise in everything you're doing. So if you're evaluating after school tutoring, you're going to need people who understand tutoring. You're going to need people who understand that content area. You're going to need people who understand the research methods part. You need to make sure that you have folks that cover everything. And then I think this is my last slide, is once you've got that final draft, you need to do a mock review. So sort of finish it, sleep on it a night, and then the next day come back and try to read it with fresh eyes against those criteria. For each of those criteria, you should easily be able to see where it addresses each item and how it addresses each item. If you can't find it clearly, you need to fix it, because you need to make it absolutely obvious. And then you also need to see, are there sections in there that don't support any of those criteria? You might want to remove them. You don't want irrelevant information in here, because that's not going to help you. If you can get someone else to help you read that, that's also helpful, because they'll be coming at it from a different perspective and may be able to give you other advice. I think, yeah, that's sort of my process for writing these proposals. And I've had some luck, but you should also assume that it's going to be rejected, because most of them are, and then you just revise and try to address it in the future. And that's what I have. I'm going to hand this over to Jennifer, who does a lot of the reviewing part and can talk about the other side.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. And it's funny, there is overlap in some of our tips. And so maybe that means these are extra important and you should pay attention to them. So I've served on federal grant reviews for the US Department of Education, and it's been probably one of the most valuable experiences. So I encourage anyone to volunteer, look for opportunities to serve as reviewers, because you just learn so much. But in the competitions where I've served as a reviewer, you have a panel of 2 to 3 independent, non-federal reviewers. And each panel is assigned anywhere between maybe 10 or 15 proposals. They call them applications. But so you're given 10 to 15. And the process is you independently read the application. You score it with what's called a technical review form. Then you meet to discuss your ratings and your comments. And then you leave that meeting, you make any potential revisions based on conversations, and then you submit. So that's kind of the process. You also, of course, go through training. There's an orientation webinar, and during that webinar, you often review the announcement, and they'll, explain like the purpose of the competition, expectations around timeline. They talk about the selection criteria, so that'll be in the grant announcement about all the different pieces that each proposal should include. And they also, as they're going through the selection criteria, they give reviewers these questions to consider. So it kind of expands on what's written in the announcement. So my first piece is around the application structure. So this is just a quick screenshot of what has been posted on a US Department of Education grant. And we are given as reviewers the technical review form, and that form fully aligns with what's in the announcement. I mean, it'll literally go point by point by point by point. So we then have to write strengths and weaknesses for each of the criteria. So, like for significance here, we would have to write a strength and a weakness. And if there are no weaknesses, we write no weaknesses noted, which is lovely. So my big tip here is use that announcement to inform your proposal headings and subheadings, which I know Amanda mentioned. But for me as a reviewer, you will make my life so much easier because I can just go through. I've got my proposal on one screen, I've got my rubric form on the other, and I can just follow through. I think it's like my worst nightmare if I have to use a PDF search feature for a keyword because I'm like, where is this in the application? And if I write down not addressed, that raises big red flags with the control panel and the admin. So it will stress me out if I can't find something. So on the flip side of that, content not to include. The announcement clearly says you can earn 105 points or however many points, and it's based on this criteria. So your space is limited, and you want to make sure you've sufficiently addressed that criteria. So don't put in superfluous content that isn't relevant. Actually, Amanda and I worked on a very urgent last minute proposal over Thanksgiving, and our partners, we were just the evaluators, but our partners put in like 50 people in their organization and what these people do for the organization. And I pushed back and I said, but that's like a ton of space that could be devoted to what you're going to do, and these people aren't even going to be involved in the work. So really think through, I need to dedicate a certain amount of space. And, if it's not relevant, don't put it in. Even if you think it may be kind of like, oh, I really want to tell them about the history of our university. I can't score that. So it's kind of wasted content. So my tip here would be don't include content that isn't referenced in the selection criteria. And then another one is, so a challenge that I've seen in applications is that the narrative doesn't really address the criteria. And one thing that I thought was interesting when I went to look for an example that was like publicly available, and one thing you might want to do is just do a Google search for technical review form for US Department of Education, and you'll see forms that have been completed by reviewers. So I was trying to find a good example, and I almost laughed when I found this technical review form. So this was a reviewer who provided feedback to an application. And in their weaknesses, they said, this is not new. It's not presenting something like that meets this criteria. And I had to laugh because I had this exact same experience reviewing in December, where all of these applications, they were talking about something that was new for their population, but it wasn't new in the whole scheme of things that have been done. And so you have to think about, am I really addressing this criteria and also situating it into the broader context? So just because it's new in my very small community college it's been done elsewhere. So like, why didn't I adopt that? So um, I think this tip is really around make sure that you are really addressing that criteria and fully. So here's the other piece that's kind of hard to talk about because I mean, I'm sure anyone could do like a Freedom of Information Act request, but what's not in the announcement and what the reviewers get. So this is a significance point from announcement from a U.S. Department of Education, and they almost always do something on significance that's around this part. So during our training as reviewers, we know this selection criteria, but then we're given these questions to consider. And these really are expanding on what's put in the criteria. So someone could write this amazing section about how what they're proposing is new and innovative, and they're citing research about what's been done elsewhere. And that would be fine, but the questions to consider are actually making you think about how to take that a step further. So talking about the potential impact within the target population and how that might be better, or we expect to be better, or, more effective than what has been done elsewhere. So it kind of goes against what I said earlier about making sure to not include superfluous information, but do take that criteria and maybe go a little bit further with it to make a very compelling argument for what you're proposing to do. I hate responding to RFPs. They stress me out because there's so many things I get worried that I'm going to forget something. But the management plan and things about like the logistical stuff, this is like the easiest place to win points. To me, this is like so cut and dry and so simple to address, but I see applicants just fall short in so many ways. So this is grabbed from a US Department of Education. And when you read it, you can identify it's like, okay, I need to have objectives somewhere. I need to have clearly defined responsibilities, timelines, and milestones. It's like 4 things I need to cover so I can make my little subheadings. One thing that is so helpful for a reviewer, and this is actually an example from one of the proposals Amanda and I worked on, is having a table. And you can just present this in this very succinct, organized way for a reviewer. And if you think about how you might present this timeline in a narrative, it's going to take up so much more space than a table does. And the fun part about tables for the US Department of Education proposals is that they can be single spaced. And so you can sneak in more information. So that last tip is like utilize tables to more efficiently address criteria when possible. And I think that's all I have. So we can open it up for questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Neitzel, Dr. Morrison, and Dr. Ross. I'm going to go ahead and facilitate the questions in the chat. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to start asking some questions, and then I will begin asking them on our behalf. And maybe if you have a question that is a little bit more nuanced than what you can type, you can raise your hand and I can call on you to speak. While our audience is thinking and generating questions, I'll have one to start. How does somebody in, say, like a PhD program or a doctoral program that isn't yet a PhD, is there a way for them to get kind of grant reviewer experience, or is that a criteria that we do not meet yet?
Oh, I don't know.
I did
All
some
of the
soft Googling on the side
yeah.
while you were presenting of some of the things you suggested, and I couldn't find anything about that in the requirements.
Yeah, you might have to have your PhD to serve as a reviewer for US Department of Education ones. I'm not sure about others.
Yeah, I would doubt that for a federal grant, whether if you were a graduate student, because they do want to pick experienced reviewers.
Sure.
However, professors that are doing reviews can work with their graduate students and mentor them. Like there is some confidentiality issues with what you can share, but I think professors that you're working with, if you're a graduate student, could be a big help in terms of doing reviews. If they're doing a review, they could be talking to you about just the way Jennifer and Amanda have today.
And I do think I mean, I've always said, I think it's really helpful to look at the funded proposals, particularly when you're writing your own proposal, because you can see, what reviewers scored very, very highly and what was funded. I don't think like you can, like I said earlier, you can search for technical review form to see plenty of examples of what reviewers have found in proposals, but I don't think you can see unfunded proposals unless you're very, very good at Googling and can, find a file that was accidentally posted or something.
Awesome, thank you. I found one. I'm going to post it in the chat if somebody wants to, if y'all would like to look at it. What else? I haven't seen any other questions populate yet. So I want to make sure that y'all are having time to digest what we learned about and also have the opportunity to ask a question while we have experts here at your disposal.
I
Awesome. I
also,
see some other examples populating.
yeah, I was going to say, I just put in the link to the awarded EIR projects because what's interesting there is you can see the reviewer comments and the actual proposals. So you can kind of compare too with like, oh, they said this was a strength. Let me see how they did it. It also lists weaknesses in there. So you can also find some things that like, wow, oh, I actually do need to address missing data. Um, yeah.
Yeah, we're told for Department of Ed ones is like if you write no weaknesses noted, then you have to give a perfect score. And then they also say like perfect scores are really, really rare. So oftentimes you will see some weakness, even if it's like very, 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 very minor.
Got it. I'm looking at that link you sent, Dr. Neitzel, and I see some of our center's work on there. So that's exciting to see represented there. That's exciting with some of our new grants coming up. All right, I'm looking, it doesn't seem that anyone else has any more questions. I think that was really because your format was very explicit and easy to follow, at least in my opinion. So at this time, I'm going to say that um, if you have any questions and want to stay on for the next 5 or so minutes, you can. But if not, then we will see you at the next Path to Publication. And thank you all so much for joining us. So again, if you're still hanging out with us, if you have any other questions, we have about 2 minutes before I am going to respect the time of our presenters and let us go right about on time. All right then. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We'll see you next time on Path to Publication. Thank you so much for our group from Johns Hopkins for sharing your wisdom and expertise with us. With that, we'll see you next time. Bye everyone.